Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're shifting gears a bit. We're moving past, the flashing lights and alerts of the SOC.
Yeah, the day-to-day firefight.
Exactly. And we're jumping right into, well, the Nexus, the place where these really technical cyber threats meet high-level business strategy. Our mission, really, for this deep dive is to take the source material we've gathered and synthesize it around four, let's call them foundational pillars. These are concepts you have to grasp to properly integrate security into the bigger picture of governance, risk, and compliance, GRC.
And this is absolutely critical. I mean, this is the conversation that takes complex vulnerability data, scary stuff, technically, and translates it into, well, financial exposure, metrics the board can actually understand and, more importantly, act on. We're essentially building that bridge between, say, the security architect and the CFO.
Okay, let's unpack that. We've structured our discussion around these four core pillars, and the idea is when you understand them together, you get a complete, actionable view of modern cyber risk.
That's the key together.
So we'll start with the technical side, defining the threat itself, and then we'll pivot to the strategic response from the organization.
Think of it like two sides of the same coin, maybe. The technical side defines the problem, right? And the strategic side, well, that defines the acceptable limits for how you solve it.
Okay, so on the technical side, defining the threat landscape, first up is the attack vector. That's the specific method an attacker uses to get in. The actual tool the burglar uses.
The lockpick, right.
The malware, the specific phishing email, maybe a chain of vulnerabilities they exploit. It's the how they get in.
And then second, still on the technical side, is the attack surface.
Okay.
Now, that's the total area of exposure. So if the vector is the tool, the surface is, well, everywhere that tool could possibly be used against you.
The whole house, not just the front door.
Exactly. Your entire organizational perimeter, every device, every public IP address, every employee, even your third-party vendors, it's the where the attack can land. It's vast.
Okay, makes sense. Now let's flip that coin. We shift to the defender's mindset. And here we have risk appetite.
Right, the strategic view.
This is that strategic boundary. It's a high-level, often qualitative decision. It comes from the top leadership, the board, and it basically says, how much risk and what type of risk are we as an organization willing to accept to achieve our goals?
It's about the ambition versus the danger, fundamentally.
And then finally, risk tolerance. This sounds similar, but it's different.
Crucially different, yeah.
This is the operational limit. These are the specific measurable guardrails, the quantitative thresholds. They define very clearly, okay, what exposure level absolutely must trigger a predefined action. It's the hard line.
Appetite is the general direction. Tolerance is the exact edge of the road.
And we need this deep dive, really, because the financial hits from attacks are just accelerating. Our sources are pretty clear. Phishing alone, just that one vector, costs businesses, on average, something like $4.88 million a year.
That's a staggering number for just one method.
It really is. And it tells you, you just can't afford to be purely reactive anymore. Organizations have to move beyond just playing defense. They need to proactively manage risk strategically. And that management has to be guided by a really clear understanding of these four concepts. It's about embedding security thinking right into the governance structure.
Couldn't agree more. It's about maturity. Okay, so to manage risk effectively, you really have to understand your opponent, how they think, how they operate. Let's start with that first pillar, the attack vector, the specific path they take to get in.
The how.
The how, exactly. Fundamentally, a vector is just the method used to breach a system. It usually exploits some kind of vulnerability, maybe one we know about, maybe one nobody's found yet, a 0 day to achieve whatever the attacker wants to do. It's that initial foothold.
And it's fascinating when you look back historically. Attack vectors weren't always these incredibly complex, multi-stage operations we see now, right?
Oh, far from it. Not at all. I mean, the whole concept really started with pretty simple network exploits. If you go way back to the 1970s, you had the creeper worm.
Right, on ARPANET.
Yeah, basically spreading across the very early internet by exploiting just basic communication protocols. Simple stuff by today's standards. Then, fast forward to the late 90s, mass internet adoption kicks in.
And the vector changes.
It shifts big time. It starts leveraging human psychology more. Think about the Melissa virus back in '99.
Oh, yeah, I remember that. Email attachments.
Exactly. Classic social engineering. It used email attachments, tricked thousands of people into enabling macros and Word documents, and boom, it spread like wildfire.
So you see this clear evolution, right, from purely technical network tricks to exploiting the human element.
Absolutely. That human factor became huge. And then came the next massive leap in complexity, state-sponsored attacks. Stuxnet around 2010 was a real game changer.
That was the Iran nuclear program one, wasn't it?
That's the one. Incredibly sophisticated. It targeted very specific industrial control systems. But interestingly, the initial vector, how it got in, sometimes it was as simple as an infected USB drive.
Wow. So physical access.
Physical access combined with a whole chain of then unknown zero-day software exploits. It was multi-layered. And that really redefined how we had to think about vectors. It forced everyone to recognize that a vector could combine physical elements, human interaction, and digital exploits all in one campaign.
So how does that Stuxnet example, relying on both a physical thing like a USB stick and these advanced digital exploits, how does that change how we should think about analyzing vectors today? It really suggests that just focusing on network security, firewalls, that's not nearly enough anymore.
Precisely. It's the perfect illustration that your weakest link, wherever it is, will always determine the success of the attack. You could have the world's best firewall, impenetrable from the outside. But if, say, a third-party contractor walks in and plugs an infected USB drive into a machine inside your network,
Your whole perimeter's bypassed.
instantly circumvented. And that leads us directly into the current threat landscape. Based on the research we've looked at, there are really 7 key initial attack vectors that organizations absolutely must focus on defending proactively, because these are the most probable ways attackers are getting in today.
Okay, let's break those down, starting with, well, it sounds like the reigning champion, email.
Still number 1, year after year. It just exploits that human element more effectively than almost any technology can. Get this. In 2023 alone, sources reported something like 73.8 billion threats blocked were email-based. That's out of maybe 161 billion total threats.
That sheer volume is incredible.
The volume itself tells you why it's such a reliable tool for attackers. It's a numbers game.
And here's where things are getting, frankly, quite scary now. The acceleration of risk because of generative AI.
Oh, absolutely. Big impact.
Attackers aren't limited anymore by, slightly dodgy grammar or using the same old templates. Gen AI lets them craft highly realistic, incredibly convincing phishing messages or business email compromise, BEC, scams.
And instantly, in any language.
Instantly, perfectly fluent in any language. They can scale these attacks with just frightening speed and precision now.
Which means your defense has to be multi-layered. You obviously need good AI-powered email gateways. That's baseline. But you also need other tech. Things like cloud access security brokers, CASBs.
Why CASBs specifically for email threats?
Well, CASBs are essential because they give you visibility and control over cloud apps, including your cloud email like Office 365 or Google Workspace. They can scan emails being sent internally, peer-to-peer, which is crucial for stopping lateral movement if a trusted employee's account gets compromised. And they integrate with secure web gateways, so if someone does click a malicious link in an email, the gateway can inspect that web traffic in real time.
So we're essentially using AI to fight AI now. Okay, vector number 2, web and web applications. What are the typical vulnerabilities attackers are going after here?
Still very often it comes down to basic coding flaws. Specifically, things like cross-site scripting, XSS. It consistently appears on the OWASP top 10 list of web vulnerabilities.
Why is it so persistent?
Because it exploits fundamental weaknesses in how web applications handle user input. They don't properly sanitize it, basically. We saw a really concrete example recently, a pretty severe XSS flaw found in the Ivory Search plugin for WordPress.
Oh, wow. WordPress plugins are notorious.
They can be. This one vulnerability potentially left 60,000 websites open to malicious code injection. Think about that. One flaw on one piece of software creates this massive attack surface.
And given how much we rely on web services now, especially with cloud adoption, remote work, that surface area is just constantly expanding.
It really is. So organizations have to minimize this risk. That means things like automated patching systems, using robust application security testing tools, SAST DAS throughout the development cycle, and adopting security frameworks that mandate disabling unnecessary ports and services on web servers. Basic hygiene, but critical.
Okay. Vector number 3 is the broad category of just vulnerabilities, the flaws in the software itself. We hear these terms thrown around: 0 days, AIM days, forever days. Can you clarify the difference?
Absolutely. It's important. A zero-day vulnerability is the most dangerous. Why? Because the software vendor has literally 0 days notice to fix it before attackers start actively exploiting it in the wild. It's a race against time.
Right. The vendor doesn't even know about it yet, maybe?
Often, yeah. Or they know but haven't developed or released a patch. Then you have end days. These are vulnerabilities that are known, patches do exist, but the victim organization simply hasn't applied the patch yet. Honestly, this is probably the source of the majority of major compromises: patch management failure.
Just lagging behind.
And finally, forever days. These are vulnerabilities in older legacy systems, maybe operational technology or ancient software that the vendor will simply never patch. It's unsupported, end of life. You have to find other ways to protect it or isolate it.
And the sheer number of these flaws, these vulnerabilities being discovered, is increasing rapidly.
Dramatically. One source, the Trend Micro Zero Day Initiative, reported a 23% jump in critical and high-severity vulnerabilities, reported to them in just the first half of 2022 alone. The volume is accelerating.
And the consequences when these are exploited can be just enormous. You mentioned the Swedish grocery chain Coop. They had to shut down 800 stores.
That's right. All because attackers leveraged zero-day vulnerabilities in a piece of software they used from a company called Kaseya, their VSA product. It shows the massive real-world business disruption that can stem from a single, highly technical attack vector hitting the supply chain.
That kind of impact. It definitely forces the business side to sit up and pay attention. Okay, vector number 4. Devices. This really came into focus during the pandemic, right?
Absolutely. Remote work just blew this vector wide open. Primarily, the risk increased because of the reliance on traditional VPNs, virtual private networks.
Now, why is a traditional VPN considered a risk vector? Isn't it supposed to be a secure connection?
It is a secure tunnel, yes. But the problem is what it connects to. A traditional VPN typically grants the user's device access to the entire corporate network, or at least large segments of it.
Ah, okay, so broad access.
Very broad access. Now, imagine an employee working from home, maybe their personal laptop or even their company laptop connected to their less secure home network, gets compromised by some basic malware or something they clicked on accidentally.
Right.
As soon as they connect to the corporate network via that traditional VPN, that malware potentially has a direct path to start spreading laterally inside the company's trusted network. The VPN becomes an attack highway. And remember that stat, the human element is involved in 82% of breaches. More unmanaged or remotely managed devices just statistically equals higher cyber risk.
Which explains this major shift we're seeing. One source mentions 63% of organizations are actively moving away from traditional VPNs towards something called Zero Trust Network Access, or ZTNA.
ZTNA is a fundamentally different and much better approach for remote access. It's critical because it operates on the principle of never trust, always verify. It continuously checks the trust level of both the user and the device itself before granting any access.
But what's the key functional difference compared to a VPN?
The crucial difference is scope of access. ZTNA typically only grants access to the specific application or maybe the web portal front end that the user needs to do their job at that moment, not the entire network.
So much more granular.
Exactly. So even if that remote device is compromised, the malware can't easily leap laterally across the internal network because it simply doesn't have that broad network access the VPN provided. It radically contains the potential blast radius and improves the overall risk profile. It's a huge step up.
Okay. Vector number 5, island hopping, or, as it's often called, supply chain compromise. This sounds like attacking you through someone else.
That's precisely what it is. You pivot from a trusted external environment, maybe a software vendor, a cloud provider, a managed service provider, even a law firm, into your target organization's network.
And this has gone from being kind of a theoretical risk to a major threat.
Oh, absolutely. High-profile successes like the SolarWinds attack or the Kaseya incident we just mentioned proved how devastating this vector can be. The research backs this up. One survey found over half, 52% of organizations said one of their supply chain partners had been hit by ransomware.
Which immediately puts their own systems at risk.
Directly at risk. This vector involves everything from third-party system management tools, shared cloud infrastructure components, dependencies in software development, even vulnerabilities hidden in open-source code libraries that everyone uses. The attack surface here is massive and often invisible to the end organization.
So defending against this isn't just about your own tech stack. It's about governance, too.
Heavily about governance. CISA, the U.S. cybersecurity agency, actually recommends 6 key steps for defending your supply chain. It includes things like, identifying who across the business needs to be involved, procurement, legal, IT, security, developing clear security policies based on recognized standards like NIST, and critically verifying the security posture and even the security culture of your key suppliers. You really have to audit them now. It's part of due diligence.
Oh, you can't just trust their marketing slick.
Absolutely not. Okay, number 6, insider threats. These are often tricky because they involve people who already have authorized access.
Right. It could be accidental, someone making a mistake.
Right.
Or negligent, breaking the rules,
Yeah.
or actually malicious.
Exactly. All 3 fall under this umbrella, and the cost is immense. One report we saw found that the average time it takes to contain an insider threat incident actually increased recently from about 77 days to 85 days.
That's almost 3 months. Why did the containment time go up by over a week? What's changing in how companies monitor this?
That's a great question. That increase, it probably suggests that the current tools used for this, things like user and entity behavior analytics or UEBA systems, might be struggling to keep up. Especially with the complexity of modern workflows, hybrid work, cloud apps everywhere, it's harder to spot the anomalies.
And the longer it takes to catch, the more expensive it gets.
Massively. The same report noted that for incidents taking more than 90 days to finally contain, the average annualized cost balloons to over $17.19 million.
Wow.
Yeah. It just underscores the absolute need for continuous monitoring, not just at the perimeter, but inside the network. Looking at data ingress and egress patterns, who's accessing what, are they downloading unusual amounts of data? Plus, rigorous mandatory security awareness training is key, specifically tailored to help employees spot internal red flags, not just external phishing emails.
Okay. And finally, the 7th key vector, cloud. Digital transformation means everyone's rushing to the cloud, and that rapid shifts has created a whole bunch of new vectors, mostly stemming from what? Misconfiguration?
Yeah. Misconfiguration is a huge one. Simple mistakes. Risky cloud application access was actually ranked as the #1 type of risk event observed in the first half of 2024 by one analysis.
And the financial cost when the cloud is breached.
It's staggering and growing. Breaches focused specifically on public cloud environments now average around $5.17 million per incident. That's up over 13% from the previous year.
And these often stem from really basic errors.
Often, yes. Things like deploying monitoring tools like Advisor and Securely, which then allows attackers to exploit vulnerabilities through container images. Or the classic accidentally leaving cloud storage buckets like Amazon S3 buckets exposed publicly with sensitive data inside. Simple mistakes, catastrophic consequences.
So the defense here really requires a comprehensive, ideally cloud-native security platform, something that can see across different clouds.
That's the ideal, yeah. A platform that supports multi-cloud and hybrid environments. You need solutions that can automate scanning of your infrastructure as code templates before they get deployed, enforce compliance checks consistently across AWS, Azure, GCP, wherever you operate. That unified platform approach is really key to preventing these simple misconfigurations from becoming wide-open attack vectors.
Okay, so those 7 vectors really define the how the methods attackers use. Now let's shift focus to the second pillar on the technical side, the attack surface. This is the where.
Exactly. If vectors are the ways in, the attack surface is the sum total of all possible entry points. It's the entire collection of systems, software, devices, APIs, cloud services, physical locations, and crucially people that an attacker could potentially target and exploit.
It's the entire battlefield.
It is, and it's almost always far, far larger than most organizations truly realize. So attack surface management, or ASM, is really about understanding and then systematically reducing the number of available targets, minimizing that where.
And we need to break down that surface, right? It's not just about computers and code.
Definitely not. The exposure is rarely just digital. We typically break the attack surface down into 3 main components to make sure we cover all bases.
Okay. First, the digital component. This is probably what most people think of first.
Right. Your public-facing IP addresses, your APIs, all your cloud services and instances, your websites and web applications, any open network ports, basically all your online software and infrastructure.
Then second, there's the physical component.
Yep. This includes your actual physical locations, data centers, office buildings, server rooms, but also, critically, all your corporate-owned physical devices, laptops, phones, tablets, even USB drives. Remember that Heathrow Airport incident back in 2018?
Where they found a USB stick with security plans on it?
Exactly. Someone found a lost USB drive in the street, apparently. That was a catastrophic failure of defending the physical attack surface, leading to a massive digital risk.
Okay. And the third component, maybe the most complex and challenging, the social human element.
Hugely challenging. This encompasses all your employees, contractors, anyone with credentials, their level of security awareness, their susceptibility to social engineering tactics like phishing or pretexting, their password hygiene habits, whether they actually follow security policies. And as we keep mentioning that stat, because it's so important, the human element is involved in 82% of all data breaches. Humans are a core part of your attack surface. And the real headache for defense teams today is just how dynamic this entire surface is. It's constantly changing. And a huge driver of that change is shadow IT.
Right. This is when employees use apps or cloud services without getting IT approval.
Exactly. Maybe the marketing team signs up for a new file sharing service because it's convenient, or developers spin up cloud instances using their personal accounts for a quick project. It's technology used outside the official managed IT environment.
And here's where it gets really interesting, right? Connecting back to the attacker's viewpoint. These shadow IT systems, they're often completely invisible to the organization's own security team because IT never provisioned them.
Correct. They don't show up on the official asset lists.
But they are often easily discoverable by attackers scanning the internet.
That's absolutely right. Attackers are constantly automatically scanning public resources. Things like certificate transparency logs, for example. These logs record every new TLS SSL certificate issued for any domain.
So attackers can just monitor these logs.
They do. They can find forgotten company subdomains, domains registered by departments that IT doesn't know about, maybe unmanaged cloud storage buckets linked to those domains. All sorts of assets the organization doesn't even realize it owns or needs to protect.
You simply cannot secure what you don't know exists.
Precisely. And this reality forces a fundamental shift in security thinking. You have to move away from passive defense, waiting for an alert, towards continuous, proactive attack surface analysis. You need to be finding these things before the attackers do.
And this analysis, this ASM process, it's much more than just running an occasional vulnerability scan, isn't it? The sources we looked at detail 6 essential strategic steps for doing this proactively to actually reduce risk.
Yes, it's a continuous cycle. Step 1 is absolutely fundamental. Discover and inventory all assets. And this must include finding that elusive shadow IT. You need automated discovery tools scanning your known networks, but also scanning the public internet for assets linked to your organization. This can't be just a manual quarterly audit anymore. It has to be ongoing.
Okay, discover everything. Then step 2, identify external exposure.
Right. Once you have the inventory, you pinpoint exactly which assets are visible and accessible from the public internet. Your public IPs, open ports, exposed login pages, cloud services configured incorrectly. What does your organization look like from the outside attacker's perspective?
Got it. Step 3, map internal reachability. This sounds like figuring out how attackers move after they get in.
That's exactly it. If an attacker does manage to breach, say, a public-facing web server, where can they potentially jump to next inside your network? What other systems can that compromised server talk to? Mapping these internal pathways is absolutely critical for understanding the potential blast radius of a breach on different systems.
Okay. Step 4, evaluate misconfigurations and weaknesses.
So now you're looking deeper. Not just vulnerabilities, but also insecure default settings, systems running outdated services, accounts with excessive privileges, weak passwords, missing security controls. These are the weaknesses attackers exploit for privilege escalation and lateral movement after the initial breach.
Right. And then step 5, prioritize based on risk, because you can't fix everything at once.
Never. You have finite resources. So prioritization is key. And this requires a pretty sophisticated risk calculation. You need to weigh multiple factors. How exposed is the asset? What's its potential blast radius is compromised? And how exploitable is the specific weakness is their known exploit code available? You combine these factors to focus your remediation efforts on the highest risk items first.
Makes sense. And finally, step 6, Continuously monitor for drift.
This closes the loop. The attack surface is never static. New systems come online, configurations change, developers open ports temporarily for testing, and sometimes forget to close them.
Happens all the time.
All the time. So you need automated monitoring that constantly scans your entire inventoried surface, comparing it against the secure baseline, and instantly detects any changes, any drift that might introduce new exposures or weaknesses. If a developer opens a port for 5 minutes and forgets it, your ASM system must detect that drift immediately, not in the next quarterly scan.
Okay, so we've spent a good amount of time really digging into the technical problem, right? The specific attack vectors attackers use and the entire attack surface they target. Now, let's pivot. Let's look at it from the defender's perspective. How does the business, through that GRC framework we mentioned, strategically decide how to manage all that potential exposure?
This is the crucial strategic shift, yeah? If the technical teams, the security folks, are primarily responsible for defining the risk, mapping the surface, understanding the vectors, then it's really executive leadership's job to define the acceptability of that risk.
Where do we draw the lines?
Exactly, where do we draw the lines? And that starts with the third pillar, risk appetite. Think of this as the organization's strategic compass for risk. It's the high-level overall amount and type of risk that the organization is consciously willing to accept or maybe even seek out in pursuit of its strategic objectives. And critically, it's fundamentally qualitative. It's a statement of intent.
Right, and this isn't set by the IT department in a vacuum. This comes from the very top, the board of directors, the C-suite, executive leadership.
Has to.
And its purpose is to guide those big strategic decisions, the overall policy direction for the entire organization, and ultimately where the money and resources get invested for protection. It's meant to stop different departments or silos from operating with totally conflicting ideas about what secure enough actually means for the business.
Absolutely prevents that chaos. To use an analogy we touched on earlier, risk appetite is like deciding before you start a road trip how adventurous you want that trip to be. Are you planning a cautious drive on well-maintained highways, sticking strictly to the speed limit? Or are you planning a more adventurous off-road journey where you expect some bumps and maybe even getting stuck occasionally? That initial decision, your appetite for adventure or risk, shapes all your subsequent planning and preparation.
So are you a high-risk tech startup focused on breakneck growth, maybe willing to accept more bumps? Or are you a heavily regulated bank needing that smooth highway?
Exactly. And that appetite must align directly with the core business goals. You can't logically have, say, a super high-risk appetite for launching experimental new products if, at the same time, you claim to have a zero-risk appetite for any customer data loss. Those two things conflict.
You have to be coherent.
Coherent, yes. For instance, that tech startup might indeed have a high appetite for certain risks, specifically around adopting new technologies quickly. Maybe they accept a higher volume of low-level vulnerability alerts if it means they can deploy groundbreaking AI features faster than competitors. They might be deliberately risk-seeking in that specific area to gain market share. Whereas a healthcare provider bound by strict regulations like IPA in the US will almost certainly have a very low appetite for risk, especially concerning anything touching electronic patient health information, EPHI. They are, by necessity and regulation, highly risk-averse in that domain.
And the real power of defining this risk appetite clearly is how it functions as a governance tool. The source material gave some great examples of how these statements sound in practice. They're not vague.
No, they should be clear directives.
Things like, we as an organization have a low appetite for any customer-impacting service downtime exceeding 4 hours in any given 30-day period.
Clear boundary.
Or, we have zero appetite for storing unencrypted sensitive customer data in any public cloud environment, regardless of potential cost savings.
Very clear, very directive. These statements become foundational principles. They ensure that when different departments, IT, security, finance, legal, product development, sit down together to make important investment decisions. Like, should we buy that expensive new encryption software? Should we invest in migrating from VPN to ZTNA?
Right.
The decision isn't just based on cost or features. It's directly tied back to these established strategic risk boundaries set by leadership. The risk appetite statement shapes policy, it justifies investments, it provides that top-level guidance.
Okay, so appetite is the strategic, high-level, qualitative policy statement. But how do we translate that broad intent into concrete, daily actions and decisions for the security teams on the ground.
Right. That translation, that's where risk tolerance comes in. This is our fourth pillar. If appetite is the broad, qualitative, strategic boundary, risk tolerance is the specific, measurable, quantitative limit on how much deviation from that appetite the organization is prepared to withstand on an operational level. These are the practical, operational guardrails.
Okay, so if the board says broadly we have a low appetite for disruption,
Yeah.
the security team needs a concrete number to work with. What's the key difference in their purpose? Appetite versus tolerance.
Tolerance is fundamentally tactical and action-oriented. Appetite sets the direction. Tolerance defines the triggers for specific actions. It informs those day-to-day management decisions, resource allocation, and crucially, it defines exactly when a predefined response must be initiated because a certain threshold has been crossed.
So it takes the maybe out of it.
Takes the ambiguity out. And for tolerance to be truly effective, it must be explicitly linked to measurable key risk indicators, or KRIs. This is a mechanism that turns a somewhat general appetite statement into a clear, actionable, measurable mandate for the teams doing the work.
Okay, let's try to walk through that translation process from the strategic appetite to the operational tolerance, using some of the examples from the sources.
Sure, let's take that healthcare provider example again. Their strategic appetite, stated qualitatively, might be: we have a low-risk appetite for any cybersecurity exposures stemming from inadequate access control or weak authentication processes. Broad statement.
Okay, low appetite for bad access control. Now, how does that become tolerant?
The operational tolerance derived from that appetite for the security operations team must be quantifiable and directly related. So it might become something like, any system designated as mission critical must be patched against critical software vulnerabilities specifically, those with a CVSS severity score of 10 out of 10 within 14 calendar days of the patch becoming available.
Okay, very specific. CVSS 10, 14 days.
Right. And they might add, any deviation from this 14-day window automatically triggers an immediate high-priority alert and requires a formal exception report submitted to the Executive Risk Committee within 24 hours.
Notice the key difference there. The appetite was conceptual inadequate access control. The tolerance is a rigid, measurable metric, CVSS 10 patched in 14 days, with a defined consequence for failure.
Exactly. Let's take another example. A big global retail firm. Their appetite might state that operational service disruptions impacting customers must be minimized.
Okay, keep the website up.
Basically. Their operational tolerance might then be defined as: regional operations managers have the authority to permit unplanned website outages lasting up to a maximum of 4 hours, affecting no more than 5% of customers within their region per incident. Any outage exceeding either of these thresholds requires mandatory immediate notification to the global VP of operations and necessitates a formal root cause analysis report within 12 hours.
Again, very specific numbers, timeframes, and escalation procedures. This level of detail seems absolutely crucial. It lets the security teams know exactly where the lines are, helps them prioritize their limited resources.
And it enables much faster decision-making when things inevitably go wrong. When that KRI for phishing clicks goes from, say, 1.5% one month to 2.1% the next month.
Don't need a committee meeting.
Exactly. The system doesn't halt while people debate what to do. The predefined tolerance level, let's say it was 2%, has been breached. Therefore, the mandatory pre-approved action, maybe it's forcing mandatory security awareness retraining for all users who clicked, commences automatically. It streamlines the response.
The source material really emphasized this need for specificity in tolerance statements. Things like, we will tolerate no more than 3 unpatched vulnerabilities with a CVSS score of 9.0 or higher residing in production systems for longer than 5 business days.
Or another common one: internal and external audits of payment processing systems must maintain a control failure rate below 5%. These hard metrics, these KRIs linked to tolerances, they are the operational engine that actually drives the execution of the overall risk appetite strategy. They make it real.
Okay, this is starting to form a really clear picture. We've defined the technical threats, the vectors, and the surface. And we've defined the strategic boundaries the organization sets, the appetite and the tolerance. Now, we bring it all together. We arrive at the GRC Nexus. This is where the integration of all 4 of these pillars actually happens, right? ###A. The GRC Nexus and maturity model.
Exactly. GRC governance, risk management, and compliance isn't just a department or a piece of software. It's the mechanism. It's the engine room, if you like, that connects those technical realities. We talked about the ever-changing attack surface, the evolving vectors directly to the business strategy defined by appetite and tolerance.
So it's the glue holding it all together.
It's the glue, the framework, the process. It's what transforms security from being seen as just a fragmented, often reactive technical cost center into a predictable, measurable, strategic business imperative. Without a solid GRC framework connecting these pieces, security tends to stay reactive, always playing catch-up. With GRC properly implemented, security becomes proactive and strategic.
And it operates like a continuous feedback loop, doesn't it? Ensuring that the real-world data coming from the security teams about the attack surface, about threats, actually feeds back into the strategic planning process. It might even lead to revising the appetite or tolerance statements based on new intelligence.
Absolutely. It has to be a living process. Let's quickly walk through the typical 5 steps of a practical GRC workflow for managing cyber risk, and we can see how those 4 pillars interact at each stage.
Okay.
Step 1, asset discovery and attack surface mapping. This is your starting point, your scoping phase. It's driven directly by that attack surface concept. You have to establish a comprehensive inventory of your entire environment, all hardware, software, cloud assets, data, including that shadow IT, and all external exposures. This inventory provides the baseline for understanding your potential risk.
Right. Know what you need to protect. Step 2, threat modeling and vulnerability analysis.
Now, you overlay the attack vectors. You try to determine the likelihood of different attack scenarios. You identify specific relevant vectors. Maybe cloud misconfiguration is a big risk for you, or phishing, or insider threat, and you map those vectors to the vulnerabilities discovered on your assets in step 1. This often involves things like penetration testing, continuous vulnerability scanning, threat intelligence feeds.
Okay, likelihood of attack. Step 3, risk assessment and alignment with appetite.
This is the core decision-making phase. This is where the technical data meets the business strategy head-on. You evaluate the impact and likelihood of the specific threat scenarios you identified in step 2, and you compare that assessed risk level against the organization's established risk appetite. Is this particular exposure, this potential scenario, acceptable according to the board's strategic guidance? If the assessed risk is high, but the appetite for that type of risk is low, then mitigation becomes mandatory.
Decision time. Step 4, setting actionable tolerances and mitigation.
Right. So for those risks identified in step 3 as being outside the acceptable appetite, this is where you define the specific measurable risk tolerance thresholds. You link them to those KRIs we discussed, like the maximum acceptable phishing click rate, say 2%, or the maximum time allowed for patching critical vulnerabilities, 14 days. Then you design and deploy specific security controls and mitigations with the explicit goal of keeping the measured risk below that defined tolerance level.
Putting the guardrails in place. And finally, step 5, continuous monitoring and reporting.
This is the critical feedback loop that makes the whole process dynamic. The organization has to continuously reassess its attack surface, because it's always changing, monitor the actual performance of its security controls against those defined tolerance metrics. Are we meeting the 14-day patching window? And report the current level of residual risk, the risk that remains after controls back up to executive leadership and the board. And importantly, if monitoring shows a tolerance threshold is breached,
the cycle restarts.
The cycle restarts, often with a predefined mandatory corrective action. It's a continuous improvement loop.
And it's this disciplined GRC process, this integration, that really drives an organization's cybersecurity maturity. Companies often measure their success in actually operationalizing this risk-based approach using a standard 5-level maturity model. This really shows the difference between a company just struggling with basic blocking and tackling versus one that has truly embedded resilience into its culture.
Exactly. That maturity spectrum is really insightful. It starts low, obviously. Level 1, ad hoc. Here, the response to security incidents is purely reactive. There are no formal risk appetite statements, no defined tolerances. Security is basically seen as an unpredictable expense, definitely not a value driver. It's chaotic.
A lot of companies probably start there or are still there.
Unfortunately, yes. Then you move up, maybe to level 3. Defined. This is actually where many larger organizations find themselves, perhaps surprisingly. At this level, risk tolerance is documented somewhere. Policies exist on paper, but the actual application of those tolerances across different teams and business units is inconsistent. Maybe the security team understands the 14-day patching tolerance, but the operations team responsible for patching lags behind, or business units push back. This leads to policy failures and that exposure drift we talked about.
So knowing the rules, but not always following them consistently, how do you get past that?
Moving past level 3 really requires deep integration. Level 4, integrated. At this stage, those tolerance thresholds are well defined, they're consistently communicated, and they are at least partially mapped to actual metrics that flow into automated monitoring systems or dashboards. Security metrics are starting to genuinely inform business decisions, but maybe they're not fully baked into everyday operational workflows or things like capital expenditure justifications just yet.
Okay, getting closer, what's the top level?
The pinnacle is level 5, embed optimized. Here, thinking about risk in this structured way, appetite tolerance, KRIs, is just ingrained in the organizational culture. It's how business is done. The tolerance thresholds are fully operationalized, embedded right into the tools and workflows used by IT, DevOps, security, even procurement. Risk analysis actively guides all significant decisions, from designing secure DevOps pipelines to vetting the security of new vendors. At this level, security stops being a drag and actually becomes a competitive advantage because the organization can accurately quantify, manage, and even strategically take risks faster and more confidently than its competitors.
So if we connect this whole GRC framework, this maturity journey, back to the bigger picture, what the C-suite and the board really need is for risk to be articulated in terms they understand best, which is usually financial terms.
Always financial terms at that level.
We need to move beyond those subjective qualitative measures like red, amber, green risk ratings.
They hate those, generally. Too fuzzy.
Right. And this brings us squarely to the concept of residual risk, which is what exactly?
Residual risk is simply the risk that remains even after you've implemented all your planned security controls and mitigations. It's the necessary acceptance that you can never achieve perfect 100% security. There will always be some level of insecurity left over. The challenge isn't to eliminate residual risk entirely, because you can't, but to ensure that the level of residual risk you're left with is manageable, it's known, and crucially, it's financially justifiable based on your risk appetite.
Senior stakeholders, the board, they want that financial certainty. It helps them make strategic investment decisions, compare cyber risk to other business risks, and, very importantly, make informed decisions about purchasing cyber insurance.
Exactly. How much insurance do we need? What should the deductible be? Those are financial risk questions.
But the sources we reviewed highlighted a major problem with how traditional risk calculation has often approached cyber risk. They point out, and I'm quoting loosely here, the direct impact of an attack is only the beginning. What follows is often a cascade of harms. This is the idea of the harm cascade.
That's a critical concept, absolutely critical. We have to think far beyond just the initial direct costs of a breach. Things like, the ransom payment if it's ransomware or the immediate forensic investigation costs. Those are often just the tip of the iceberg.
So a single trigger event, let's say that successful phishing attack leads to a ransomware infection. That one event kicks off a whole chain reaction.
Precisely, a ripple effect. That initial ransomware trigger propagates loss across the business in multiple ways. You have the immediate business interruption systems down, factory stopped, sales lost. Then come the potential regulatory fines, maybe GDPR in Europe, HIPAA for healthcare data, state-level fines in the US. Then the legal costs start mounting, maybe from class action lawsuits filed by affected customers or employees. Then there's the often hard to quantify but very real reputational damage, loss of customer trust, and ultimately loss of future profit because customers go elsewhere or investors get spooked. These cascades are why the total financial losses from major cyber attacks can quickly spiral into the tens, even hundreds of millions of dollars, far exceeding the initial direct costs.
And traditional financial risk modeling techniques, things like value at risk or Vanessa that banks use for market risk, they've historically really struggled to capture this cascading, nonlinear nature of cyber risk, haven't they?
They have. Standard VAR wasn't really designed for this kind of interconnected propagating risk. And this realization, this gap in modeling capability, is what spurred some really innovative work on new financial models specifically for cyber. One prominent example highlighted in our sources is the cyber value at risk, or CVR, model. This was developed through joint research between folks at Oxford University and the insurance company AXIS Capital.
Okay, cyber value at risk, CVR. How does it differ from traditional VAR?
Well, traditional VAR typically relies on three main variables: the potential size of losses, the probability of those losses occurring, and the time frame over which you're measuring. The CVR model significantly enhances this by adding three additional variables that are absolutely crucial for quantifying cyber risk properly. Number one, control effectiveness. How well do your defenses actually work in practice? Number two, control dependencies. What happens if one control fails? Does it take others down with it? And number three, explicitly modeling that harm propagation effect we just discussed.
Okay, those sound like major additions. What's the core insight this new model provides, especially regarding how we should think about the effectiveness of our security controls?
The CVR research fundamentally changes the game, particularly from an actuarial or insurance perspective, but also for internal risk management. It demonstrates quantitatively that the true effectiveness of any security control has to be measured not just by its ability to prevent the initial harm, block the attack vector from
Stop the
spreading.
breach in the first place.
Right, but also by its ability to prevent or limit the onward propagation of harm if the initial breach does occur. Can it contain the blast radius? Furthermore, it forces you to explicitly model those control dependencies. If your primary endpoint detection, EDR, fails to stop a piece of malware, does your network segmentation control still function effectively to prevent lateral movement? Or does the failure of Control A make Control B essentially useless? A realistic CVR calculation requires understanding these complex interdependencies to arrive at an accurate picture of your true residual risk.
And this kind of sophisticated modeling, it provides that quantifiable financial proof that boards and CFOs need to justify potentially very large security investments, right? The research gave a really clear example of the ROI.
It did, a very compelling one. They ran CVR simulations comparing two hypothetical but identical organizational systems. In the second system, they added just one additional security control, one specifically designed to limit harm propagation. A robust data encryption mechanism deployed across sensitive data stores.
They just added encryption.
Just added encryption effectively. The simulation results were striking, even in a scenario assuming only medium effectiveness for that encryption control. Its presence dramatically suppressed the potential for the most extreme, catastrophic financial losses. Looking at the tail of the loss distribution curve, the effective financial cap on potential losses came down significantly in their example, from a potential worst case around $60 million without encryption down to roughly $20 million with encryption.
Wow. So that $40 million difference in potential avoided catastrophic loss, that is the measurable, quantifiable return on investment for implementing that specific encryption control.
Precisely. It's not guesswork anymore. It allows the CISO and the security team to go to the board and say, investing X dollars in this encryption project is projected to reduce our potential maximum loss from Y event by Z million dollars based on this validated CVR model. It lets them reason about the organization's residual risk levels in concrete financial terms. It gets realistic about the true nature of cyber risk by explicitly acknowledging that controls aren't perfect, they can be faulty, they depend on each other, and harm cascades. Ultimately, this CVR approach helps provide that financial certainty that leadership needs, turning what often feels like amorphous cyber fear into disciplined, financially calculated risk management. #tag outro Matt.
Well, this has been a really intensive, but I think incredibly valuable deep dive into these 4 essential pillars of strategic cyber risk management. Just to quickly recap the core idea, attack vectors are the how, the specific methods attackers use to exploit the where, which is the total landscape of your attack surface. And then the GRC framework uses the strategic risk appetite, how much risk is acceptable, and the operational risk tolerance, the specific trigger points, to actively manage that resulting exposure, ideally keeping it within quantifiable, financially relevant limits using models like CVRR.
That journey moving from purely technical jargon and reactive defense towards strategic alignment and proactive management, that really is the ultimate goal here. When organizations manage to fully integrate these 4 concepts into a disciplined, GRC-driven process, that's when they shift from constantly just fighting fires to achieving genuine, measurable resilience.
Security moves out of the IT basement, so to speak.
Exactly. It stops being just an IT silo and becomes embedded in the organization's culture as a disciplined, risk-aware capability, where cybersecurity decisions are demonstrably tied directly to financial outcomes and the overall strategic objectives of the business.
Okay, so here's the final thought we want to leave you with today, something to mull over. That Oxford research on CVRR provided another really critical finding. Mistakes in configuring security controls can sometimes, obviously, render those defenses ineffective. We know that. But, and this is the really interesting part, poorly configured or failed controls can sometimes also accidentally make the attack surface larger or easier for an attacker to navigate, maybe by leaving behind artifacts or information the attacker can use.
A failed control becomes reconnaissance data.
Precisely. So, given that the complexity of our IT environments and our security stacks is only increasing, what concrete steps should organizations prioritize now to ensure their deployed security controls are actively limiting harm propagation, as intended, rather than potentially accidentally enabling it. This goes way beyond just patching known vulnerabilities. It requires a much deeper understanding of how your specific controls, your EDR, your firewalls, your segmentation, your encryption actually interact with each other in your unique environment, and how an attacker might potentially leverage a failure in one control as their entry point or pivot point to bypass another. Really think about that complex interplay of dependencies.
That is a provocative thought to end on. Understanding the relationships between your controls, not just the controls themselves in isolation, might just be the next frontier in effective cyber defense. It's becoming as important as understanding the threats themselves.
Absolutely. Something to consider. Until the next deep dive, stay curious.